Okay, I think we'll get going then. Welcome everyone to this Tableau Prep user group. Good morning if you're joining us from the US, and good afternoon if you're joining us from Europe, or good evening if you're further ashores. It's definitely a very sunny and warm day here in London, so I hope it's nice weather where you guys are. A few things before we get going. If you know people that haven't been able to attend this session, or you want to share it with people after we finish today, it's going to be recorded and it'll be posted on Tableau's YouTube channel as usual. So we'll just dive into a bit about the session. If you've joined one of these before, you would have heard this, but for anyone that hasn't, just a bit about me and the session. So I'm a consultant at the Data School, which is part of the Information Lab here in London. I joined the Information Lab 18 months ago now. So I've been working with Tableau Prep and the whole Tableau product suite for a while now. And I particularly enjoy Tableau Prep. I think it's a really good tool that is constantly being developed. And as you'll see from one of the talks today, there's constantly new features being pushed into the software to enhance it further. If you want to connect with me after this session or during, you can see my Twitter and my LinkedIn there, or I have a blog, which is noneofyourbusiness.co.uk. So yeah, as I mentioned, I use Tableau Prep in my day job, but another way that I have got familiar with the tool is by participating in Prepping Data, which is a community-led scheme by some of my colleagues at the Information Lab. So each week they push out a data prep challenge. So there'll be an input data set and an output. Sorry, I'm just seeing in the chat, people may have trouble hearing me. I think you may just have to bear with it. I know there's a lot of internet issues and stability problems here in London today. But yeah, please just persevere with it if you're struggling. Prepping data, yeah. So if you just Google prepping data, you'll be able to find it. It will come up. And there are weekly challenges of a variety of difficulty. And you post your solution to Twitter each week, and you can review and compare with other people as to how they've solved the challenge. And I think it's a really good way to develop your Tableau Prep and data prep skills in general. So definitely look that one up if you haven't heard about it before. Just before we dive into our speakers today, just a bit of information from Tableau about the free Tableau Prep Builder licenses that were issued 2 years ago. So when Tableau Prep was first launched, there were a load of 2-year free license keys issued to customers. These keys are going to expire on the 30th of June. This was always in the plan. This is not anything new that Tableau have done, but if you are part of the new subscription model and you have a creator license, then you have absolutely nothing to worry about, as things will just continue as normal. If you have one of the more legacy licenses, then you will need to make sure that you've got a creator key after the 30th of June to continue using Tableau Prep. So that's all from me, really. We're going to dive into our speakers now. I'm really excited about today's session because we've got 3 great talks for you. And some really exciting new features that are coming to Tableau Prep. So we've got Jonathan, Richard, and Youssef who are going to speak for us today. And I'm just going to let each of them give a little intro before we dive into their session. So Jonathan, would you like to unmute yourself and just give an intro to yourself?
Thanks, Tech. My name is Jonathan Drummey. I'm based in Biddeford, Maine, where it's also quite warm today, and I'm a data visualization specialist at Path. We're a nonprofit with projects all over the world working in public health. So one of our projects is the Visualize No Malaria project, which is a Tableau Foundation supported project. And so I use a mix of Alteryx and Tableau Prep in my work. I really love Tableau Prep for its ease of use. And I also spend a fair bit of time on the Tableau community forums supporting prep users there in the tool. So that's me.
Perfect. Thanks very much. Richard, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Richard. Ives. I work for a company called Moo. We print business cards, office stationery, that kind of stuff, and a whole bunch of accessories for business as well. Personally, I'm now the operations planning manager, so I deal with all the S&OP stuff. I'll go into a little bit more detail in my presentation. But with regards to prep, more recently, I guess, it's been the conductor side of things. It's been really exciting. It means that I can just, all the repetitive tasks I used to do, I can just automate through on Conductor and stuff like that. But I also thoroughly enjoy Builder and spend an awful lot of time doing prep flows, basic pipelines that are manual at the moment.
Perfect. Thanks, Richard. And finally, Youssef.
Jack, my name is Youssef Shoukrey. I am a product manager at Tableau. I work on the data management team. I work specifically on Tableau Prep. I'm based out of Seattle, and it's a very pleasant day here in Seattle. Probably not as hot as it is in London, but for Seattle, it's a perfect day. I've joined Tableau about 2 years ago. I spent this entire time in the Tableau Prep team. I've been in the BI space for about maybe 8 or 9 years now, and I'm very excited to be here.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. So we're going to dive into the sessions now. Just a few pointers for the audience. If you haven't attended one of these sessions before, our speakers will speak for around 20 minutes, and then they'll take a few questions. So if you have any questions during their presentations, please submit them to the Q&A panel. So not in the chat, in the separate Q&A box. We obviously won't be able to get through all of the questions, but we'll try our best to get through a fair few, and we'll download the questions afterwards. I know Youssef is particularly keen to be able to answer all questions that you may have for him. So I will hand over to Jonathan now.
All right, thanks. And I'm going to stop my video so that won't confuse you too much, and share my screen. All right, can you see my screen?
Yeah, I can see it.
Great. So I'm going to talk about running and moving calculations and some other forms of the Tableau Desktop calculations that we can do in Tableau Desktop that are not yet native functions in Tableau Prep. I say not yet. I don't actually know when Tableau might add them, but I've got to imagine they'll come at some point. So in the interim, we can build them ourselves. So I'm going to cover a few different things. So getting progressively more complicated. So doing running sum and other kinds of running calcs, then a moving average, talk about other moving calcs. What can we do when we don't have some sort of field that gives us an order in the data? Talk about what do we do with gaps in the data, lookup operations, do a little review, and that'll be that. So talking about running sum and other running calcs. I built a little explainer in Microsoft Excel here. It's the most commonly used BI tool, and I've certainly done a lot of data preparation in that myself. So it's great for showing just our data here. So we've got a simple data set. So I have just letters alpha and beta. Each goes for a series of 5 days, and then there's a series of values. And what we want to get out of it is a running sum. So on the first day for alpha, it's 4. On the second day, we're going to add 3 and get 7. The next day, add 2 and get 9, and so on. Then if we're going to write that in Microsoft Excel, we might write a running sum formula manually. So our first cell is going to be C2 here, and then we're going to add C3 plus our E2, and then C4 plus E3, and so on. So each running sum is adding the current value to the prior running sum value. But another way we could look at it, if we kind of blow it out, is that in this expanded formula, each running sum value is actually a computation across multiple records. So for this third row, we're adding up the values of C2, C3, and C4 to get that running sum. So thinking about that, how can we take that logic, where we don't have a simple function to do that in Tableau Prep right now, to do that in Prep? So what we can do is join our data to itself, so we get these three records with the three prior records of these three values with our new record. And so what we end up with as an intermediate data set is something that looks like this. So here we have for January 1st, we have just one row, but then for January 2nd, there's our date. Our join date ends up having two values, the first and the second, with the associated values of 4 for the first and 3 for the third. And then on January 3rd, we have the three prior values, which 2, 3, and 4 in this case, and so on. So this is an intermediate data set. This is how the join is configured. We're going to see that in just a minute in Tableau Prep. And then the last step here is we're going to aggregate back to that level of letter and date. So in this case, the sum of those original rows is 4. The sum of 4 and 3 is 7. 4, 3, and 2 gets us to 9, and so on. So that's how we do a running sum. So I'm going to switch over to Tableau Prep. And here's that same data. We were just looking at in Excel. I'll turn this on and then review data. And of course, Prep is deciding not to show anything at the moment. And I'm getting an alert. Okay, let me quit this and reopen this. And Youssef, I hope you're recording this.
Taking notes, Jonathan.
Yeah. Okay. I have another bug here. I'm on a Mac. Sometimes when I click on the save link in the most recent, it doesn't open the file. That's another little issue I run into sometimes. All right, let's hope these are coming up. This is just not happening. All right, let me just completely quit. So there's a number of different demonstrations I had prepared. All right, if Tableau Prep is not going to quit, I'm going to do a force quit, and then we will restart. And this is the 2020.2.3 release of Tableau Prep Builder. What I'm showing you is, a whole chunk of what I'm showing you is completely possible in earlier versions of Tableau Prep, and I'll let you know when a specific version is required for something. So I'm going to open up a flow here from my running sum. Here we go. So there's the data. Let's zoom in to the flow so we can see that. So there's our rows of data. So here's alpha has got the 5 rows, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2 on this. And then we're going to do a self join. And in Prep, if I want to join something to itself, I can't just drag something and drop it and get it on itself. I need a separate step to join back to itself. So this is This clean step is just preparing for join, and the changes that I made here, I just renamed the field. So I renamed my value to running sum, and I renamed my date to running date, just to make it a little easier to pay attention to what's going on, because it can be very easy to get confused. And then I created the self join here. So letter is letter, and then the date for my original date is greater than or equal to the running date. So if I look at alpha, on the January 1st, we end up with just the one row. If I switch this now to January 2nd, we've got the 2 rows. So the 4 and the 3 for the running sum. Going to the 3rd, we have 3 rows, and so on. And then I can just aggregate my data to get my running sum here. So I'm summing on, I'm aggregating on the letter, the date. I also have that original value in the group by. So I'm preserving all of my original rows of data at their level of detail, and then I have the running sum computed. So if I look at alpha for the 2nd, that's the 4 plus the 3, so there's my 7. So that is a running sum for each. Then let's go to slightly more complicated issues. So let's say I wanted to have just my running sum, not at the level of letter and date, but across all the dates. So in this case, the level that I want to do my running sum at is at the level of date. So I'm going to first aggregate my data to that level of day. And then I'm going to go through the same process of preparing for the join. So there's my running date and the running sum. Then I'm joining it into that aggregated result. And I'm kind of blow out all my rows here to have a number of rows, but then I aggregate that back to the level of date. And then we have 7, 14, 21, 28, and then 37 for the last value of our running sum. So that's aggregate. So that's the case where we need to aggregate before the running sum. Then there's one other complication we can have. This is a very simple data set. It's just got 3 fields. So what happens when we have data with a bunch of fields? So a lot of columns. And in this situation, I have, so this is an extract I created out of Tableau Sample Superstore with about a dozen columns in it. And I don't know about you, but when I start having a group by with more than 3 or 4 fields doing an aggregate, it's really easy to start getting confused about that. So in this situation, what we can do in Tableau Prep is break out our workflow. So here, to compute my running sum at the level of product and month, which is the level of detail in this data, I just keep those 3 fields. So our product, my month, and my sales. And then I'm doing the same, getting ready for my running sum, doing the join, doing the aggregation. So now I have my running sum for my product and my month across each of them. And then I can join that back to my main data set here and continue on from there. So just to review that, so if we need a smaller data set for computation, we're going to remove columns. We're potentially going to aggregate before we generate the running sum. For each records, we're going to join values from prior records using that non-equijoin. And then we're doing that aggregation here to get our running value. And then if necessary, we're going to join back to earlier data from these 2 steps if we need to for our output. So that's how to build a running sum in Tableau Prep. So with that, I'm going to talk about moving averages now. So back to Excel for a little explainer on that. So here we go. I'm going to use the same data set. And in this case, we're going to do a 3-day moving average. So the trailing 2 days plus the current day. So on the first day, it's just 4. On the second day, the average of 4 and 3 is 3.5. Third day, the average of 4, 3, and 2 is 3, and so on. So in thinking about this, And again, if we kind of think about what order of operations we use in Excel, we can, sorry, getting distracted by questions for a second here. I will return to the presentation, answer the questions at the end. So in doing this manual moving average, we're again doing computation across multiple rows. So we're going to feed those rows through a self join into Tableau, only we're changing the join criteria. So in this case, from our date, we have a moving start date of the 2 days prior and a moving end date of, in this case, because we're just going to the current day, that's the same as our date. So for January 1st, we're going to pull data from December 30th to January 1st. For January 2nd, pulling data from December 31st to January 2nd, and so on to get that join. So to show this in Tableau Prep, and there's my moving average one. Let's make this bigger. So starting out with that data set, I am creating that moving range with just a couple of calculated fields. So here's my moving start date as I'm just subtracting 2 from my date. So with dates, we can add and subtract whole numbers, which are the number of days. And then I also have creating the measure where I'm just renaming some fields. And then this is where the magic is happening to join out our data. So the join criteria are more complicated here. We're joining on our letter, and then we have our moving start date less than or equal to our moving date, and our moving end date is greater than or equal to our moving date. And I'm also doing this as a left join to make sure I'm not losing any rows here. So when we look at, I'm going to pick on alpha here. So on January 1st, we just get 1 day because there's no data before January 1st. For January 2nd, we get 2 days. I'll go to January 3rd. If I can click properly here. And then we have 3 days worth of data. So we can see those 3 different moving dates, January 1st, 2nd, and 3rd are all part of this. And then from here, the last bit is to do our compute our moving value. In this case, we're doing a moving average. So I'm just doing an aggregation across the data. So if we look at alpha on January 2nd, it's 4 and 3. So it should be 3.5, and that's what we're seeing. So the moving average is very similar to our running sums. We're doing a self join on the data with conditions and then aggregating that. So I'm just gonna skip through this a little bit to move ahead. So there's times when we don't have an ordinal field in our data to work with. So I have set up another example of this. Where I have data that's just a set of colors. Let's make this bigger. So we have a set of blue, green, orange, red, yellow. So that is the sort that Tableau Prep is displaying. How it would sort it in the running sum is based on how the data gets queried. And let's say we want to order it in the rainbow Roy G. Biv, so red, orange, yellow, green, blue. So to do this sorting, I have a separate table, which is just identifying that sort order of the colors. And then I can join this in. But even with that, now I know the order I want to do things, but there's no easy way to tell prep red needs to go to orange, orange needs to go to yellow, and so on. So this is where we use the row number function. This was introduced in about Tableau 2019.4.3 or 4 or 5 or so. And the row number function looks like this. And I've got a little demo on PowerPoint here. So this is creating a unique row number for each record in the data. So in Tableau Desktop, this would be like a rank unique or an index. There's our syntax. So we're partitioning on a set of fields, and then we have an order by on a set of fields. So the partitioning is the grouping or restarting fields. And then the order by is determining those ordering fields and the sort order that they're used in, so we can do ascending and descending on each of them. So that's what we're doing here. We're for each shirt size, we're using our color sort in ascending and generating a row number for each. So now red is 1, orange is 2, green, yellow is 3, and so on. And then in this case, I'm just doing a running sum on it, and it's the same old. We're going to prepare for join and do that join, except in this case, instead of using date, we're using the row number that we've added to the data to do that. And then with this notion of using a row number that we're adding to the data, we can do, if we need to do moving calcs, we just say like we're going to do a max and a min row number that we're going to join on with some calculations, and then do that in a moving. So the key step here is we're adding row number to identify each record, and then we're going to use that row number in defining our range that we're joining on. For gaps in the data, this is if we have gaps that we need to work over, we're going to need to pad out our data and potentially impute zeros. And we can do that using scaffold tables that have like a table with all our dates. It can take a few seconds to build one of those in Excel and pull it into Tableau Prep, and then we can join that in with our data. And just for time, I'm going to skip over that one in detail. And I'm going to talk about lookup operations. So these are where we want to carry values from one row forward or backward to another row by some number of steps. And in this case, we're doing a very similar set of things, only we're changing those criteria on how we're going to join back the data and ultimately just to get one value. So switching back to Tableau Prep. Where's my lookup? So there's that simple data again, and let's say I just want to get the prior value with the current value so I can do a difference from prior and so on. So in this case, I have a calculated field which is just creating an offset for my date. And this is where it can be a little confusing in setting this up, that if we want prior dates, we're adding to our offset, and then if we want next dates, we need to subtract for that offset for what we end up with. But once you get it down, then it's just kind of easy to do. And then here we're joining that. So we're not using a non-equijoin, we're using an equality operator. And we can see, and I'm also using a left join to make sure I'm not losing any data. So for example, for alpha, on January 1st, there is no prior row, so we're getting nulls out of our join. It's marked red here. In the mismatch join condition. And that's what we would expect to see, is to get a null there and so on. So that's how we can do it. So if we need to do a lookup 3 days before, we can just change that offset and bigger. And again, I showed the row number where if we don't have something that has an ordinal value like dates, we can do that. So with that, with most all of the Tableau calculations, we can do these in Tableau Prep. So I've shown lookup, running, and window functions. One thing that's really cool about Tableau Prep is there's been something that's really hard to do in Tableau Desktop is doing like a window count distinct, so a moving count distinct, and we can totally build that in Tableau Prep as well. So that's a great thing. For total, we can use a fixed level of detail expression to get the equivalent of total for doing like a % of total. The rank functions, Those are equivalent in the tools, except Prep's rank functions do not ignore nulls the way Tableau Desktop's rank functions do. There's a difference there. And then for these, what I call is ordinal table calculation functions of index first, last, we can use row number for all of those and size. And then when it comes to previous value, that's a very special case where some of the use cases for previous value we're able to do in Prep, and other ones, it gets really complicated. So I'm not going to do any demos on that. And I'm going to switch over to answering questions right now.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. That's a really, really interesting talk. What you've covered off there in about 20 minutes is amazing. And I think it's going to be really useful for a lot of people. I'm just going to give you a few of the questions, and then any left that we haven't answered, then feel free to respond to them in the Q&A during Richard and Youssef's sessions.
All right.
But we'll start at the top with Tom. I'm sure you can see these as well, but could you basically do the inverse process of a running sum by having cumulative totals for each day and go backwards to get the daily totals?
Yeah, so part of where this came out of for me was actually doing some COVID-19 work with Anya Ahern for the Tableau COVID-19 Data Hub. And we had a data set that was coming in as, it was all cumulative totals. So what we needed to do was the lookup, effectively do that lookup operation so we could get the previous day with the current day, so we could compute, okay, what is today's difference? So totally doable.
Great, thank you. And then from Mark, have you got any ideas as how we could add in a reset to the running sum, for example, so that the user could determine the number of consecutive occurrences of something?
So the reset is, this is actually already in the flows in the way. So if we think of, I'll try to answer this in two different ways, and let me switch over to my running sum demo here. So in this case, this join is on letter and the date. So if I don't have the join on the letter, then I'm just going to go through all of the dates. So we're effectively doing that partitioning, to think about it in a Tableau Desktop sense, by the join criteria that we set up here. So that's determining the restart. So if I had multiple rows for each day, for example, I could have date as part of my join criteria to force a restart for each day.
Okay, perfect. That's great to see that is in there. And then the final question, this has actually come up twice, so I guess we can get two of them done. They're really great techniques doing these in Tableau Prep, but given that they are innately possible in desktop, what's the benefit of moving these calculations out of desktop?
So one thing is I've got two answers to that. One of them is in Tableau Desktop, table calculations are processed late in the pipeline. So we need to if I want to do a table calculation, let's say I have 50,000 users and I want a running sum across those 50,000 users across 12 months worth of data. I need 50,000, I need my dimension with those 50,000 users, my dimension with my 12 months in there, and 12 times 50,000 is 600,000 marks of data in order to do that calculation. So that's moving a lot of data from the data source into Tableau to process when I might want to do an average of that or something like that, and I'm only showing maybe 12 marks out of it. And so that can make it slow, whereas if we do it in prep and pre-compute it, it can be really fast. So that's answer number one, is around performance. Answer number two is that table calculations, anybody who's used table calculations in Tableau know that they can get pretty complicated. As soon as we build something that's a table calculation, any follow-on operations on that also have to be a table calculation. which can add a lot of complexity to our views as we start nesting the calculations 2, 3, 4, 5 levels deep. So I think of Tableau Prep as a way I can, where feasible, pre-compute what I need in order to get the results that I want, and then I'm simplifying what I have to do inside Tableau Desktop.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you. As soon as you start to nest table calculations, it can get quite messy and confusing within your dashboards. And as you pointed to, slowing them down, and obviously we want to do everything we can to increase the performance of these dashboards for the users. So being able to do this before you bring the data into Tableau is great where possible.
And then I just want to add one more thing with Prep as well. Like the vast majority of data that I work with is really sparse data, where it's missing a lot of values. Like not everybody has reported on malaria data on every month that they're expected to, for example. And being able to use a tool like Prep to make sure that my data is complete, so that way, when I do that running sum, whether it is in Desktop or in Prep, it'll have all the data it needs so it can work right.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for that.
Okay.
You'll see there are a few more questions still in the Q&A, so feel free to go ahead and answer those.
Yep.
Thank you. And then we will move on to Richard. So Richard, if you'd like to take the stage.
Sure thing. Let me just grab screen share. There, I think. So I'm pretty much going to walk through a use case, which is that we're using at Moo. So I'll crack on through this. So what we're going to do is just I'll quickly do a reintroduction of who I am, who Moo are, and one of the challenges that I had recently, my prep solution, which was exciting to work through, and then a couple of walkthroughs of some of the parts of the flow with a comparison to what we were previously having to do, which kind of shows what we've replaced by using prep. And then just a quick recap of usage, and then how do we use that data at the end of it, kind of thing. So why did we even bother doing it in the first place, I guess. So knowing me, knowing Moo, this is more around kind of like me. I'm the operations planning manager, so I'm responsible for the sales and operations planning function within Moo, and that means that I'm taking helping people generate lots of forecasts, and then helping our supply chain partners and manufacturing understand that demand within their function. More on that as we go through. Who are Moo though? Moo, just to bring their strapline out, or our strapline out, we bring great design together with technology. As an online print and design company, as a company, we're passionate about great design and the difference it can make, and using technology to help that facilitate that process. So kind of taking the bigger design challenges and production challenges and bringing that into a smaller package online for people to use. I just keyed out. So what do we make? Moo, we make all the kind of stuff you want for office stationery. So it's business cards, it's mini cards, it's stickers, it's notebooks, envelopes, presentation folders. The list seems to be growing, ever growing. Recently, moving into more things like greeting cards as well, and masks. So it's quite a varied product line now. From when we started, it was just business cards, so all we had to do was order paper, make sure we had enough presses to print this stuff on. But now we've got a fairly wide gamut of product, and therefore a very wide list of parts or components making that up, which we have to manage through demand. So my challenge more recently, obviously, with the in these troublesome times, is finding myself taking on lots of other people's data processes and pipelines, and also accumulating an awful lot of manual deliveries of pipelines myself. We don't have an S&OP package, but a piece of software to be able to help me do this sort of thing. So gathering the forecasts from around the business, pulling them together, mixing that with some kind of bill of materials or something, and tying in with our warehouse management software is quite time consuming. We've got third-party partners in that. Obviously, everyone uses Excel, so there's a whole bunch of Excel sheets flying around as well. So my challenge was to try and pull all these things together into one kind of more resilient or collaborative approach. So to do that, I found Tableau Prep a while ago. Before I started in this role, I've been with Move 6 years over here in the UK. But more recently with this, I found Prep for this role and was using it in the data engineering department. More recently, when Conductor came out, they very quickly become my best friend, being able to take all of the flows that I do and run frequently and repetitively and conducting them on the server itself. More locally at the moment, I'm able to access cloud-based data sources. I can run Python, making API calls to third parties. I can tie that in with complex calculations, and then deliver that out to a variety of customers in a variety of means, all of which help I get from Prep. So what indeed did I try to do with this? So one of the most important parts of the S&OP process is helping materials plan for ordering materials over time. So a supply plan helps us do that. What do we need to order? How much of it do we need to order, and when do we need to order it? Taking in the current stock levels, matching that up with component specs and products, and lining it up to demand forecasts over a period of time in the future. So we've broke that down a little bit. We've got 3 kind of inputs. So what do we need? We need what stock we have now, so the available to promise. We've got a third-party warehouse management system which we use, which is the POSCO. They release that data out to the market through their own UI, but they've also got a RESTful API endpoint that I can call on to get that, which we'll see in a minute. We need to know what parts are needed for each of the SKUs that we sell on the site and offline. So we need a bill of materials, we need to pull that in, and we need to be able to quantify those parts. And then we need to also bring in things like batch efficiencies, the impositions on the page, so we know how many sheets we need to order and that sort of things. And then finally we need, and most importantly, we need a demand. What demand can we expect? So another part of the role is to bring all of the demand for the business into a single demand plan. And that's our final input into this flow. So building through, just very quickly, I didn't go into all of the detail of it here, but with Prep, we need to bring in some data. It doesn't really matter what data. It could be a relevant data source. It could be anything just to get you started. We've been able to push it into Python. I need to connect to a TabPy server. It's locally here at the moment. I haven't got that running on the server. We're still trying to just get that in a resilient thing on our VPN. And we need a bit of Python. A fairly standard piece of Python, making a RESTful API call. We do want to reshape the data. So we've got the output schema at the bottom just to reshape the data. It's very simple. It's only 2 things we need from the input data. We just need the item number and how much is available to promise at the moment. So how much do we have on the shelf? And that's what the output schema does for that. On that side of things, so what did we have to do in this before? So instead of just running that flow, which is a nice simple 3-step flow, what we had to do before was either use Postman, and we'd gather the ATPs down through that. We'd then have to convert that XML output into something that we could use in something else. So it could be CSV, it could have been JSON, but normally CSV, so we could import it into Excel. I've lost the window, which I'm going to desperately try and find, which is my little notes. There it is. So someone in the materials team would have been doing that before. They would even before that, or alongside it, if the person running Postman wasn't around, it was really fragile process. Was someone in the materials team would log into the POSCO software and just run a manual report to save it to CSV as well. So again, that would have made it quite fragile. We then, with our bill of materials, we need to bring in the product list of the components, parts and quantities required. There's a whole process within that building and the bill of materials on how we build that. That's another prep flow, but not for today. Bringing the imposition on sheets so that we know how many items are on each page, so that we know how to multiply the parts and quantities to get up to sheets. It's an Excel spreadsheet, so it's a multi-dimensional file, so it's really, really wide, which is great for Excel, but it's much more efficient if we can pivot that data around. And I do that in here, just pivot in the parts and pivot in the amounts as well, and then joining them straight back together again afterwards. Well, unioning them and then grouping them, just to get them back into a format that I can use, which is quite thin but quite tall, which is much better for moving forwards. And then I output that back onto the server, ready for the final step in that process of the supply plan. This was all done in Excel before. They're quite big sheets. Quite big sheets with lots of Excel functions which were clunky. There was lots of different versions of Excel flying around, or versions of Excel spreadsheets falling around, so it's hard to find which one was actually the master at any given time to be able to output and that kind of thing. So we've made things a little bit more resilient in that case as well. The demand plan side of things, it's a fairly big process, this around gathering data from an awful lot of places around the business. So they're all in Google Sheets. So we bring all of those in and we union them together, pass through a few cleaning processes, pivot them around just to make them more efficient for processing later on. And joins, we have a SKU forecast, which is at a physical item level, so packs of cards or packs of envelopes, that kind of thing, which we bring in as well. Again, we pivot those, union them, pivot them around, do a bit of cleaning up, union everything together, apply some fairly standard rules to some things if we're just making, so at the moment there's like the COVID effect on some of our accessories, so we're having to reduce or lift our product mixes across the board to be able to adjust for that, to make it more real on the output, and then outputting that to Tableau again. Now that was a monster of an Excel spreadsheet before again, and that was the clunkiest thing on earth and would fall over pretty much every time it was run, because of just the complex nature of the calculations that were involved. Putting them into Tableau Prep enabled me to explain that data a little bit better, which was nice. It helped to enable other people to access the prep flow, also to be able to contribute and collaborate on making sure that things were refined and tested. Because it is something quite complex, that was really necessary to buy in around the business. So what did we have? We've got just run through a quick recap of what we've been doing with prep. So what extract methods we use, kind of which transformation processes are performed, and the resulting load steps were run. And then finally, just a quick look at where does this data get used, because that's really the most important part. It's fun making all these flows, and it's kind of fun conducting them and just watching them fire, but it's having the outputs is really, really cool for us, and that's our customers at the end of it. So input wise, we've pulled in data from Tableau server, obviously. So we've had data sources coming in. We've had some third-party data direct connections that we've been using. We've been linking out to Google Drive and getting Google Sheets and Excel spreadsheets that are saved on Google Drive. And we've been using Python for accessing third-party data through a RESTful API call. So that's where we've been extracting data from. And this is where someone like Carl would say, I've just beaten around the bush given my ETL and stuff, but what transformations have we been using? We've transformed data by limiting the scope of filters. We've been targeting data by removing unused fields. We've made the data cleaner by renaming stuff. We've added new data with calculated fields. We've been appending data with unions, expanding or limiting data with the joins, and transposing the data with pivots. And then finally reducing the data with grouping, all standard functions that all of us use every day, but it's quite interesting to be able to get all of those functions into one flow, and it was really exciting to see them all flowing together. What outputs? All of the outputs pretty much at the moment. we've output to the server, we output local hyperfiles for testing, and then we also output to CSV, which is fantastic because then we can't obviously all enjoy Tableau. There's the obvious competitors. So output to CSV for Excel and the like other reporting tools as well is a useful tool to do. Got my fingers crossed here for the database thing, which I think has just hit beta, and I haven't had a proper chance to try that out yet, but I'm looking forward to being able to pump data back into a database as well, rather than have to keep sucking it in and out of Tableau server. So what do we output this data with? So we have some Tableau reports for our materials team, for example. We can, from pulling all this together, we can, for every single part number, for every single supplier and every single component that we make, we can then determine how long something is going to be in stock for. So we can see where the red crosses start, and that will tell us that we're going to run out. You know, if we'd run this in week 26, then you know this first part here, which I think is a notebook, is going to run out in 3 weeks time. So we may need to know we need to make some urgent calls on ordering that side of things. This is really useful stuff that they haven't had before, and they use it really quite a lot. Other things that we need for the materials team is things like forecasts for suppliers. So all of our paper suppliers, you know, stuff like Fedrigoni over in Italy, they're struggling with staffing just like everyone else. So they really want to know what we're going to be ordering. They don't necessarily need it down to a week level, but it can be quite interesting for the materials team to be able to show blockages or peak periods where we might need to just understand why a month is bigger than another and that kind of thing. So this is also something that we've never had before as an output, that they can just run a report, subscribe to it. They're given this report every week or every month, depending on what they're ordering and who they're ordering. And that's been helping them an awful lot as well. We have obviously other obvious outputs as well. But that would be like going through to capacity planning on the presses. We've got labour capacity planning as well, and also down to the system side of things. We gel in with OEE and consumable consumption as well. So that's really how we've been using Prep. I say we, it's mainly me at the moment, but a small team of others collaborate in every now and again. And that's our supply plan, how we've been using Prep and Conductor.
Brilliant, thanks Richard. It's really interesting to see how you've leveraged Prep Conductor to save a lot of time, I can imagine. Yeah. It's actually one of the questions that's come in. Do you know how much, or can you even quantify the amount of time that has been saved by moving all of these to Prep Conductor?
It's really hard. I know I can quantify my own time because I get to see all the free time I have now, which I obviously don't, because people just fill it when you leave those blank gaps in your calendar, don't they? But yeah, the supply plan part has saved me probably 20% of my week, where I was doing an awful lot of this data manually before. So I guess 20% of my week is a fairly significant amount of time. That's one whole day where I can now concentrate on things. So that goes across the board. That's not just my time, is it? I suppose it's others as well.
Yeah, no, that's really great. And also, so you touched upon how you're using Python scripts in some of your flows. How would you recommend people getting started with Python and or R scripting in Tableau Prep?
I think with anything in Prep, it's really easy just to start to crash in on it, really. There's some great stuff on the community and the developer pages around some help pages on how to get started really easily. Installing things like the TabPy server locally is just a very simple pip install. It didn't require anything other than that. As far as, and then you're only really limited once you've got the TabPy connection set up and you drag some data in. It's more around what you do with the Python scripting itself. Remembering that you're passing a pandas data frame in, or receiving a pandas data frame in, and then manipulating data within Python, remembering the output schema, and then passing back a data frame back into Prep. So if you remember, you've got a data frame either end, whatever you do in the middle is relatively, you can do pretty much anything you like with it.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you. I've seen lots of people. Actually, in the previous user group session, which I posted a link to in the chat, there were people doing all sorts with R and also using Python to write to database, which shortly won't be required, but there's all sorts you can do using the Python, the scripting tool. You can call APIs. There's a lot that can be added to prep in that. And my last question for you would be, Jonathan's spoken about table calcs and Youssef's about to speak about write to database. What would be the feature you would most like to see in an upcoming version of Tableau Prep, excluding the two things I just mentioned?
I don't know, personally for me, I think I struggle at the moment, and it's probably a limitation of my knowledge on prep really, is bringing data in from a data source and passing it back to the same data source. I'm kind of confused at the moment as to why I can't do that. So my workarounds are brutish to get around that. But yeah, I think that would probably be my current thing, is kind of taking a data source and then being able to append data back into it. Something as simple as great.
Yeah. Same. Taking that on board, Youssef. Yeah. You're there.
Yeah,
and so with that, Richard, thank you very much. And I will now hand over to Youssef, who is going to talk about some very exciting features that are coming in the latest version of Tableau Prep. So I will hand over to you.
All right, thanks, Jack. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So my name again is Youssef Shoukrey. I am a product manager on the data management team. I focus mostly on Tableau Prep. The data management team owns Tableau Prep Builder, Tableau Prep Conductor, and Tableau Catalog. But for the past almost 2 years, I've been working on Tableau Prep. I started working on Tableau Prep Conductor when I joined Tableau. And then lately, I've been focusing on projects like writing to external databases and moving Tableau Prep to the browser, which you might have seen demos of in the last Tableau conference. So I'm going to jump right into the demo to show you some of the writing to external database capabilities, which are currently in beta. So you can today go download the beta, sign up for it, download it, and try them yourself. And then I will have a couple of slides talk about what else in this area, in the writing to external databases area, is on our roadmap, and some resources for you to check. Okay, so let's jump into the demo. So I have built a simple flow here just to get us started. I get data, sales data from my West region and some returns data. I join those. I do some cleaning. This is from our very popular Superstore data set that you're probably familiar with. And now I want to send this data into a database table. So this is a pre-release build. So that's a disclaimer that it is not a final release yet. I'm gonna add an output, and you'll see that now there is a new option to output to a database table. So I'm going to select that. Now I can select one of 7 databases that we're shipping initially for writing to database: Microsoft SQL Server, MySQL, Postgres, Amazon Redshift, Snowflake, Oracle, and Teradata. It will also show me any existing connections that I have in this workbook that is one of these 7 types. And I happen to have a Microsoft SQL connection already in this workbook. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to select a database. And here I can select an existing table in this database, or just type a brand new table name if I want to create a new table. So in this case, I'm going to go a simple create a new table scenario. I choose creating a new table. And once I do that, actually, one thing I want to note here is, let me zoom into this. For Microsoft SQL and Postgres, because there is no schema dropdown in Tableau Prep, today, in order to allow you to specify a schema that is not the default. So if you just pick a table or type a table name, it will be created in the default schema. But we give you the option to specify a specific schema using square brackets format, schema name dot table name, and then you can write that table to a different schema that is not your default. And then I will see 3 different modes for writing this table, this data into that database table. The first option is create a new table. So every time this flow runs, it will always create a brand new table. If the table with the same name happen to exist, it will be deleted first, and then it will be created again with the new data set. The new table could look nothing like the old table. The old table will be discarded, and a brand new table that is built on top of this data set that will resemble the schema of this data set will be created. The other option is append to an existing table. So Tableau Prep will check if the table already exists with that name. If it does, then it will append the data to it. And in the next demo, we will see how can you see how fields match between your flow and between the database table. The last option is replacing the data in an existing table. It's before I talk about the replace data, in the append table case, if the table doesn't happen to exist, so if I have append table option selected and Tableau Prep didn't find the table with that name, it will create it the first time the flow runs. And then any subsequent times the flow run, data will be appended to that table. So if the flow will not fail, if the table doesn't exist, it will just be created. And then the next time the flow runs, it will append the new data to it. Replace data similar to append, except that, so it will still look for an existing table. If it finds it, it will load the data to it, but before it does that, it will truncate the existing data. So it will discard the existing data and it will load the new data to the table. But the table will keep its structure, its constraints, its indices, its primary key, foreign key relationship. So everything about the table will remain the same, just the data will be replaced. So these are the 3 options. In this case, I'm going to select the create table option. One last thing I want to talk about before I run this flow is we also let you enter custom SQL that can run before or after the data load. So if you put in a SQL statement here in the before section, then before we attempt to load the data into the destination table, we will run the SQL statement. And the same for after. A good use for this is if I want to create an index on my table after it's created. So for example, I'll actually do that, and I will create an index. Let me just make sure that I put the table name right. Okay, so now I'm creating an index on the approver column in my table that will be created after the data is loaded and the new table is created. So I think things look good. I'm gonna run the flow. And now Tableau Prep will write this table into the database. If it exists, it will delete it first. And it's now done. So I have this table in the database, and we'll confirm that in the next demo. One thing I want to talk about quickly about how we do writing the data in the database is in order to not mess with your existing data. So if you're appending data to an existing table, what we do is during the data load, we load the entirety of the data into a temp table first. And after we're done, we do a one transaction to move the data into the destination table. So if a problem happens during the inserts, during loading the data to the database, the entire operation can be rolled back without your destination table having partial data or be in an incomplete state. All right, so the next demo I want to show, I'm going to do an append scenario. So I have a similar flow here, just have different data inputs. So this time from my central region, and I want to append it to the same table that I just created. So I'm going to go ahead and create an output. I'll pick database table. I already have the connection, so I'm going to select that. Going to select the database. And I'm going to look for the table that I just created. It's right here. This is the same table I just created in the first demo. And for this demo, I will choose the append option. So when I choose append or replace, where I'm writing into an existing table, you can see there is a new view here that shows you fields from your flow and fields from the database table compared side by side with matched by name and type. So you can see what fields match, which fields don't match, and if the fields don't match, need to be fixed so they can you can match them successfully. So for example, I can see here with a quick glance, there are two fields in the database table, returned and days to ship, that don't have a match in my flow. And if I scroll all the way down, I can see that there are two other fields, DTS and is returned, that don't match the table in the database. So clearly, it seems like this other data set has two fields that are obviously not named properly or not named the same way as the other data set that I used to create this table. So that it's easy to fix. I'm going to go to a cleaning step, and I'm going to change these fields to match the database fields. And if I go back to the output step, this will refresh, and I will see that all the data sets are match days to, oh, I missed, there's an S missing, okay. So I'm gonna do that. And now all the fields should match 100%. And I will run the table, I will run this, I can run this flow and it will add this data set to the existing table. Another thing I can do here is I could drop the index in the before SQL, which is sometimes it makes the data load more efficient, and then recreate it in the after SQL. So you have the option to do any cleaning or any altering in the database that you need to do before the load and then after the load. So in this case, I'm dropping the index that I just created in the table in the first demo, and I'm recreating it after the data is loaded so it doesn't interfere with the data load. So I'm going to run this flow, and now the data is being written to the same table appended to it. So the last demo I will show is similar to this one, except we'll use another new feature that was released semi-recently, which is incremental updates. So some of you might have seen it in the most recent Tableau Prep builds. I think it was released maybe a couple of months ago or something like that. So I'll show you how this feature works with writing to database. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new, so I have another flow here. I'm going to create an output to the database table. I will select the database, same database, and I will select the same table that we just created and added data to it. And I will choose to append, but before I do that, I'm going to go back to my input. This one flow, the input here is from another database. So I'm from another database table. So that's, it's not from a file, it's from a database table. And you can see that there is an option in the input settings that enables incremental refresh. And what that does is every time this flow runs, it will look up a certain field. So in this case, I will pick row ID, and it will only bring the data, the new data that were added since the last time this flow ran based on that field. I can pick my output, and I will pick the same row ID field. So every time this flow runs, it will make a query to the output destination table, see what's the highest row ID in that output, and then it will query the input to only bring the data that is higher than that row ID. It can also be a date. So if you have, if it's a transactions database table and you have transaction date, you can use a transaction date as your incremental refresh field. But in this case, I'm just going to use the row ID. If we go back to the output settings, you'll see the UI changed a little bit. Now I have two different options, option for full refresh and option for incremental refresh. So when you configure incremental refresh on an output, this output can run in two different modes based on your preferences. So now this output can run incrementally or it can run fully. And the same thing happens in Conductor. So you can schedule your flow to run either incrementally or fully. And that's useful in scenarios where I have a flow, a business critical flow that brings data from a database table into another database table, for example, and I wanted to run it on hourly basis to always bring the new data that's added. So I can set this output to run hourly incrementally, and then at night, maybe on daily basis, I can have it run do a full refresh, so it resets, and so if there was any transaction that was missed, or if there was any issue that happened in one of the hourly runs, then the daily full refresh will fix that. So in this case, for the full refresh, I would like it to replace the data, and for the incremental refresh, I would like it to append the data. So every time I do an incremental refresh, it will add the data to the output table. But if every time it will do a full refresh where it will bring the entire input data, it will replace my destination table. And then when you run the flow, you still have the same two options. You can, here in Builder, you can choose to do a full refresh run or an incremental refresh run. As you will also in Conductor, you will be able to create different schedules for full refresh or for incremental refresh. In this case, I can run it for a full refresh, and it will replace the data in the destination because I have replaced data selected for the full refresh runs. So with that, that's the demo I have. What I want to do next is just talk a little bit quickly about what do we have planned that we haven't shipped yet in this very first version of writing to database. Some of the things that are on our roadmap, on our backlog, and then some resources that you may find useful where you can download it for the beta, and then we'll open it for some questions. Right. So what else is on our roadmap? What's on our backlog for the write to database area after our V1 goes out, which it's currently in public beta. The first thing is more connectivity options. That has been the first ask we get as soon as the beta went out. Our users are asking for more connectivity. So today, like I showed, we support 7 databases, but our users are asking for more databases like BigQuery and or XSL and other, and we'll continue adding the other top request databases. So I encourage you to go to our ideas website, either vote if the idea is already there for a database output, or enter a new database output that you'd like to see us support, and we use that as an input to our prioritization. The next is bulk data loading. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So today, most of the databases that we support, except Snowflake, and I'll talk a little bit about that specifically, are doing batch. We load the data using batch inserts. So we insert data in batches to the database table. Bulk data loading simply means that I can use the database specific mechanics to bulk load my data, typically by writing it into a local file first, sending the file to the database, and using the database specific commands to load the data to it. The one database that we support bulk loading for today is Snowflake. So we use Snowflake staging area, where we write the data into a local file. We send it we stage it on the Snowflake side, and then we use Snowflake commands to load the data into the destination table. What that does, and what bulk data loading in general does, is allows you to load larger volumes of data in a much more efficient way, and it's typically faster. So we intend to extend that bulk loading support to all the other databases that we support, or to all the databases that support bulk loading. So for example, Amazon Redshift, you can think of uploading, like configuring your S3 storage where the file gets pushed to that S3 storage, and then the data loaded to the database from there. Or for Teradata, they have TPT, which is the Teradata Parallel Transporter utility, where you can do bulk data loading in a much more efficient way. So we intend to continue supporting more databases, more bulk loading mechanisms for more databases, beyond just Snowflake, which is available from day one. The next thing is giving you more control. So one of our hardest cuts in V1 that we made is not letting you control the size of text fields when you create new tables. That's something that we know you want control over it, and it's something we intended to do. Just given the timeline and in order to ship on time, we had to cut that out of V1. But we intend to add that in future releases. Today, we make those decisions for you. You can always go back to the database, change the sizes of the fields, and continue loading the data to it. But we intend, or we would like to give you that control right in Tableau Prep. Some other options, some other control options we want to give you is deciding whether when we load the data into a string field that is too small for the data to fit in, should we truncate it or should we fill the flow? Today, we are sort of biased towards success, so we will truncate the data and make it fit into that field. But maybe that behavior is not preferred. You value data correctness over success. So we want to give you that configuration where you get to decide which behavior makes sense for you. Another control option is you're running your flow on daily basis or on hourly basis, and then new fields show up in your input fields, in your input tables or input databases. Should they be matched and written to the destination table or not? We want to give you control over that. Another thing is we've seen cases where when the custom SQL fails in the after category, the flow will fail. But really, the data loading has happened already, because by definition, we don't run that command till the data loading is fully done and successful. So although it shows as failure, but the data loading has succeeded. It's just whatever command you chose to run after the data loading had failed. So today it will fail. You'll see an error message that tells you why it failed, but maybe you want to ignore that. Maybe you want to show the flow as succeeded. So multiple areas and there are a few other sort of advanced control options that we'd like to add to make this feature richer and make it work the way you expect it to work. Other things quickly are interactive field mapping experience. So right now, when I showed comparing the fields from your flow to the database table, it's a static experience. You can still see which flows are matching, which are not. You will see if there is a type match, for example, you'll see a warning that says this field type is mismatched. But we don't give you the affordances to fix it right there. You have to go back to a cleaning step like I did, change the name of the field to make it match. We intend to make this matching experience more interactive, where you can fix these issues right there. You don't have to go back to a cleaning step to do so. We would like to also add some samples from the database table. So if you're not sure, is that the right field that I should write this flow field to in the database table? So some sample data from the destination table might help you make that decision. And also we've heard from server admins that they would like to have control over allowing which databases flows in Prep Conductor should write to and allow to write to. And we want to give more control to admins. Finally, some resources. Here's the link for the beta. Please download it, try it out, send us feedback. We really appreciate it right now. Before the release, we want to catch any issues that you may find. Like, database configurations vary massively between companies and users, and we would like to get as much testing on that as possible. So we'd appreciate it if you'd sign up for the beta and try it out. And if you have any feature requests, any new data sources you want us to support, just add an idea on our community site, and we are monitoring those and using it for our prioritization. With that, I'll just start taking questions.
Thank you, Youssef, for that. A really exciting feature that's coming in the not too distant future. It's also really nice to see you cover off what you guys have planned and acknowledging what is currently not there in the first version, because as with all of these things, they're going to be developed over time. There are a fair few questions. I know some of them you probably won't be able to answer, but so it's come up a few times about IBM DB2 being on the roadmap as an external database. Is that something that's in the plans, or would you recommend people put that in the community ideas?
Yeah, I would encourage people to add it to the community ideas, or if it's somebody else have added, just vote the idea up, and we use this to influence our prioritization. So please do so. Okay,
great, thank you. And that the community forum, community ideas goes across all Tableau products. If there's things you'd like to see in desktop, then definitely have a look at the ideas as well, because the devs look at these a lot and it influences what goes into the product. So definitely upvote stuff that you'd like to see in there. So there's one question here that says, what if something goes wrong and you're using append? Is there sort of a undo that you could do, or would you need to have a backup ready before appending?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we try to minimize the chances of you ending up with a partial state or incomplete data in your table. So what we do in the append and in the replace is we write all the data to a temp table first. We don't write it directly into your destination table. After all the data have been added to that temp table, so if there is any connection problem during the data load and that failed, your destination table hasn't been touched. But after the data is successfully loaded to the temp table, then we do a single transaction to move the data from the temp table to append it to the destination table. If that single transaction failed, it will roll back. If it didn't, then the entirety of the data will be added. So the chances of you ending up with a partial or dirty state of your destination table, we try to minimize that as much as possible. There could be some corner cases where this still happen, but for the majority of the cases, that shouldn't occur.
Okay, great. So what else do we have here? So another question, it's not specifically towards rights database, but Mick has said, currently when publishing to Tableau as a Tableau data source, you see a flat list of projects, so all levels of nesting in a single list, saying it'd be convenient to be able to drill through the nesting of projects on the server. Are there any plans to make this nesting visible?
I will say that it's something that we're aware of. It's a pain point that we've heard often, and it's definitely on our radar. I would still encourage you to add it, or I'm pretty confident it is already there in the idea, so it would be great if you can vote it up. But yes, it's something that we're aware of, and we intend to fix or improve.
Okay, great. So a quick one, again, is probably going to be a go to the ideas, but any ideas when Tableau Prep will feature a native web data connector like in desktop?
It's very much on the radar. It's something that we would like to allow you to connect to APIs and other data sources. So it's something that the way we do that, it's still in the works, but the goal is something that is very important to us.
Yeah. Okay. No, I understand you can't necessarily give too much away. And then finally from Bruce is about the incremental refresh, just some clarification. So when you set the data input to incremental refresh, it sounds like that limit should pass through to writing to a database. But what you show makes it look like setting input is equal to incremental gives you both the ability to write to database in increments or full. Is that a correct understanding?
So it's on both. So it's a setting that so the incremental refresh itself, you set it on the input node. But when you set it in the input node, you need to pick which output this will apply to. The reason you set it on the input node because you select which field in the input that will be looked up and used as your as the guide for prep to know whether new rows were added or not. And then on the output, you get to decide what how the incremental refreshes and the full refreshes will behave. And then when you run it from the output. So you can run your output in an incremental fashion or in a full fashion.
Okay, I hope that clears it up for you, Bruce. So I think with that, we'll bring things to a close. There are a few questions knocking around, but I can send them over to you, Youssef. But thank you very much for your time today and sharing that with us all. It's definitely very exciting. I'm going to dig into the beta, and I think Jonathan posted in the chat or maybe in the Q&A box about how you can get your hands on the beta, and it's also in Youssef's presentation. So if you want to go and dive into that yourself, then definitely go ahead, and I'm sure Youssef's team will be more than happy to listen to your feedback on the features. So with that, I'd like to thank Youssef, Jonathan, and Richard for speaking today. It's been a really interesting session, and I hope you guys have taken something away from this. Again, there are my socials if you'd like to connect with me. Any feedback on the session, or if you're interested in presenting at a future talk, then feel free to reach out to me. We're always looking to get new speakers in. The sessions are generally every 2 months, so we'll probably be looking at end of August, beginning of September for the next session. So look out for that. Reach out for me if you want to present, and have a good rest of your days. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay.